We have several goals for today. We will start by providing you with an overview of the most frequently asked questions and clarification requests. We will also outline key lessons learned by sector. And we will finish by answering some of your questions and point towards useful resources. So moving on, let's take a look at the overall structure of the webinar. Today, as just mentioned, we will have different colleagues leading us through the 4 different parts that we have envisioned for this webinar. I will begin with providing you with a short technical overview. In the second section, my colleague Nina will dive into the frequently asked questions and clarification requests received to date for the Ambition Initiative Round 2. In the third section, both Ernesta and I will share some lessons learned from different sectors in which our NAMA support projects intervene in. And at the end, if time allows, both Nina and Ernesta will cover a few questions from the chat. So before we jump into the core topics, I would like to make a couple of technical clarifications. As you can see, we are using MS Teams today. And I would firstly like to ask you to fill out a brief anonymous survey that has just been published in the chat. Thank you. And as you may have noticed, all participants have been automatically muted, and we kindly ask you to please not unmute yourself during the webinar to not distract the speakers and audience, as well as keep your cameras off. As previously mentioned, this session is being recorded and the recording will be shared with you later on. Finally, we ask you to submit any call-related questions to our email address or in the chat where they will be collected as well. If we have time, they will be answered during this webinar. Otherwise, any questions submitted today will also be covered in the upcoming round of clarification notes. So with this, I will hand over the word to my colleague Nina.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Thank you very much for a kind introduction. Welcome to this last webinar devoted to the Ambition Initiative Round 2 from my side as well. And as Ellen has already announced, I will cover most common frequently asked questions and clarification requests, in particular that we received during the Ambition Initiative Round 2. So, a bit of statistics to start with. Under the Ambition Initiative Round 2, we have already published 74 frequently asked questions. It's quite a lot, but compares with previous calls of the NAMA facility. To date, we had 4 rounds of clarification notes and published or answered around 40 clarification questions. There are 2 more rounds of clarification questions or publication of answers to clarification questions. And the first round will be on the 30th of March 2022. And if you want your question to be featured in this clarification notes publication, please make sure to submit your questions by the 27th of March. To the contact@namafacility.org, or again, if you ask your question in a chat, we will be able to answer it if not today, then either individually or as part of clarification notes that will be published on the 30th of March. There will be also the last round of clarification notes published on 20th of April 2022, so 10 days prior to the closure of the Ambition Initiative Round 2. And if you want, or if you have a question and you want it to be addressed on the last round of clarification notes, then you're invited to submit your questions by the 17th of April, end of business. In this case, we will be able to address it. It will be the 6th round of clarification notes publication. All the dates are also published in the chat by my colleagues, and I'm very thankful for that. And let's move on to our selection of most common questions. We decided to cover them by topics and also point out to the specific places when more extensive responses are provided to your questions. So what we noticed during the current rounds of clarification requests is that quite a lot of questions were submitted regarding country eligibility. So we thought that it would make sense to reiterate some of the most important points again. The questions ranged from the kind of deadline for the submission of indices to UNFCCC, to the security situation in the country and how it can affect the success chances of the NSP outline. So to reiterate again, among the formal eligibility criteria are two. It's the country in which the NSP intends to intervene in. This country must be included in the OECD DAC list of recipient countries throughout the entire implementation of the NSP. It means if the graduation date is known, officially published, officially communicated, for example, again, in the DAC list itself, and this will come in 2023, 2024, the country will not be eligible to participate in the Ambition Initiative Round 2. This is when the clear date of the graduation from the DAC list of recipient countries is known and officially communicated. And it will happen in the upcoming years. First updated or second NDCs should have been submitted to UNFCCC until the end of COP26, and this was the 13th of November 2021. So this is another eligibility criteria at a country level, which is quite specific to the Ambition Initiative call and the Ambition Initiative Round 2. Countries that has already received support from the NAMA facility can participate in the Ambition Initiative Round 2. We received quite a lot of questions of this kind, so it's important to remember that there are no limitations in terms of countries that are already receiving support from the NAMA facility. And of course, since in many countries there are tense security situations, this is a very relevant question, and we want to emphasize that existence of a conflict or security concerns will not lead to an automatic exclusion of the NSP outline or a country from participating in one of the calls of the NAMA facility, and in this case, in the Ambition Initiative Round 2. But again, depending on the context of the NSP outline, depending on the context of the project and its geographic boundary and area of implementation, those security concerns still will be taken into consideration during the NSP outline assessment process. If you want to learn more about the eligibility of countries, you can go to FAQs and clarification notes. In FAQs, it's FAQ 12 and 16, and also clarification notes 1 and 2 covered some of those questions in more detail. Another topic that we received quite a lot of requests on is NDC partnership. Quite a lot of potential applicants were concerned whether the participation of a country in the NDC partnership is a prerequisite or an eligibility criteria to participate in the Ambition Initiative Round 2. So here, you can hear from us, and you can rest assured that participation in NDCP is not a prerequisite for being eligible under the Ambition Initiative Round 2. So it's not one of the eligibility criteria for countries, but it's something that the NSP outline should be aligned with if the country is a member of NDC partnership and if partnership plans exist. So in case of the NDC partnership plan being elaborated or existing already, it is desired, it is needed that the NSP outline is well aligned with the partnership plan. If the sector is not yet covered by the NDC partnership plan, but is included in countries' NDCs, a lack of alignment in this case is acceptable because, again, as you know, we have this requirement of the requirements of the NAMA facility in general, and the Ambition Initiative Round 2 are strongly linked to the NDCs. So of course, in this case, NDC, so to say, would have a priority. If you want to learn more about countries that are currently participating in the NDC partnership, you can visit the NDC partnership website. You can also download their NDC partnership plans and learn more about the countries that are members of the NDCP. So again, if you want to have more extensive responses or specific questions, you can learn more in clarification notes. It's FAQ 14 and also clarification notes 3 and 4. The fourth clarification notes were published quite recently. The third topic that we would like to address with FAQs and clarification requests, and again, we received quite a lot of questions on this topic, is financial leverage. And the range of questions was quite significant, from the definition of what leverage funds are to kind of how mandatory it is and whether there are any specific ratios. So again, I would like to address this topic in more detail. Leveraged funds are additional funds that will become available for investments in the NSP, so for investments in the mitigation technology promoted by the NSP, and that would not be spent on the same purpose in the absence of the NSP. So leveraged funds are clearly additional funds, if those funds will not be channeled towards the mitigation technology or investments into mitigation technology in the absence of the NSP, in this case, you can claim that the funds are leveraged. There is no minimum ratio of how much funds should be leveraged and in relation to the NAMA facility funding requested. But we can share with you, and again, it was part of the FAQs already published, that based on the previous calls of the NAMA facility, we noticed that successful NSPs usually have a ratio of 1 to 7. So per €1 of the NAMA facility funding requested, the leverage rate or the funding leveraged is usually 7 times higher. Just to keep in mind, but again, it's nothing that is set in stone. As a rule, there is no minimum ratio. What I'm sharing is just something that we observed in the NAMA facility portfolio. In-kind contribution may be counted, but of course, it is greater weight, or it's more important if there are funds that are directly mobilized. It can be public sector budgets, it can be funds raised through taxes and tax exemptions, or grants, loans, guarantees, etc. Mobilization of funding from the private sector is not mandatory, but again, it is seen as an important factor and an important contributor towards triggering transformational change and towards transforming the sector in the direction of carbon neutral development. Because not only public financing, of course, is necessary, but mobilization and contribution of the private actors, of course, something that can contribute to sustainability of the NSP results in the future, and this way also help maintain the transformational result or transformational potential, transformational change triggered by the NSP. The fourth topic that also was quite often was featured in your clarification questions and FAQ was on the topic of pilots. Just to remind you about the background, the piloting modality was introduced as part of the Ambition Initiative call, and it remains valid for the Ambition Initiative Round 2. The piloting modality allows piloting of novel technologies and allows NSPs to have, so to say, 2 stages. One was a smaller scale piloting stage, and then a shift towards a larger scale, so to say, full scale project implementation. So the focus of this piloting modality is on innovation and novel technologies, but not all NSPs should focus on innovation and novel technologies. So piloting modality is optional, it's not mandatory. Piloting of mature technologies in a new setting or context cannot be considered as innovative. So the focus of this modality is really on novel technologies, not on traditional or set technologies in a new setting. Timeline for transition from pilot to a larger scale project is not defined, in particular in, for example, a general information document, but shift from the piloting stage to a larger scale stage of the project should be accomplished within the NSP's lifetime. For that, it is crucial for the NSP to transfer from the piloting modality to a larger scale implementation project is an achievement of predefined and agreed milestones. So without that, the project will not be able to move into the top scale itself and to move into this large scale stage. In terms of outline, like very practical concerns that you might have, how to cover all of it in your outline, in annexes, how to develop a budget. So in this case, the task is quite complex. You will need to focus on both piloting phase and a large-scale project in terms of the narratives that you feature in the NSP outline, and also in terms of the data that you provide in annexes. Budget should also be indicated for both phases, so for a piloting phase and for a large-scale project. There are a lot of FAQs and clarification notes published on this topic as well. So FAQ 31, 32, 33, a whole section covering this piloting modality, also clarification notes 1, you can take a look at them for more details. And please make sure to check NAMA facility webinar on the Ambition Initiative call, because when we described or talked about the topic on NSP outline development, case studies and examples, piloting modality was presented there as one of the examples. So please make sure to take a look if you are interested in this modality. With that, I will finish an overview because those were the 4 topics that were most commonly featured, as I said, in your questions and clarification requests. There, of course, as usually you saw already this slide, if you participated in the previous webinars of the NAMA facility, a lot of additional resources available on the NAMA facility website. So crucial documents, of course, application documents and Ambition Initiative Round 2, general information document. Make sure to recheck again the set of application documents, because we updated mitigation guidelines and back in February. So something that will help you. There are no dramatic changes, it's just additional instructions and additional help for you in terms of developing the annex on greenhouse gas mitigation potential. Check M&E framework, because it will help you to develop your log frame, and in the future, if the NSP outline is successful, to develop an M&E plan. There are a lot of webinars. I already mentioned some on the Ambition Initiative call. There's also 7th call webinar on the NSP outline development. There are 2 podcasts, one on the greenhouse gas mitigation potential, another one on the development of the financial mechanism and business model. And of course, there is a webinar on financial mechanisms and NAMA facility support projects. And of course, I will encourage you to look into different publications on the NAMA facility website, starting from the fictional NSP outline on focusing on Tatinia, do's and don'ts, various lessons learned that will also partially be highlighted now in the upcoming section of this webinar, but also featured in many various supporting documents that are published on the NAMA facility website. Last but not least, I will already feature in this section what will come next, because what we will have are upcoming clarification notes, publication of clarification notes, as mentioned, and as you can see in the chat, on the 30th of March 2022 and on the 20th of April 2022. Please make sure to check the dedicated page on the NAMA facility website on the Ambition Initiative Round 2. And of course, keep in mind the deadline for submitting the NSP outlines. This is 30th of April, 3 p.m. Central European Summer Time. And with this brief overview, I will give a word to Ernesta and then to Hélène to introduce to you some lessons learned from the sectors in the NAMA facility portfolio.
Okay, thanks, Nina. Yes, so next we'll look at some lessons learned across these 5 sectors that, hopefully give some higher level insights that could be useful in preparing your NSP concepts. And first up here is the transport sector. And we have a couple of lessons to share today. Starting with the lesson on stakeholder consultations, which are very desirable from us, and ideally they would involve also the municipalities that are relevant for a given NSP. And these stakeholder consultations and the involvement of the municipalities are essential for understanding the needs and interests for both the public and private actors relevant to an intervention, and as well as for forming a clear sectoral overview of actually what's happening, let's say, in the transport sector in your given context. So as you can see or picture, the transport sector is, well, one of the characteristics of it that we've seen is that there seems to be quite a complex web of stakeholders involved, which then in turn requires quite extensive planning efforts to ensure that that stakeholder buy-in is there and is achieved in a timely manner as well. That might also include such aspects as coordination efforts among the relevant ministries to ensure that the policies are aligned and that there's no conflict of interest, which then in turn would help maximize actually the impact that the NSP can achieve. Transport initiatives tend to be a rather long-term infrastructure projects, and hence the preparation times can be rather long. So we'd encourage you to also think about that and plan realistically to make sure you account for those timelines too, and they are adequately described in the NSP concepts. Last point here is on displacement and informal economy, 2 factors which are very relevant for the transport sector project. So again, an encouragement would be to consider them and account for them in your NSP ideas. If we go next now, we have a couple more points here. So again, transport projects are lateral long-term projects. So this might also mean that the majority of the mitigation potential that can be achieved can lie further in the future, meaning beyond the lifetime of the NSP. However, it's very important that actually the mitigation potential that can be achieved within the lifetime of the NSP is accounted for and communicated to us. So both of those aspects, the mitigation potential within the lifetime of the NSP as well as beyond the lifetime of the NSP, should be accounted for. We have a couple of points here also on the e-mobility programs. So first of all, the supporting infrastructure such as charging stations is crucial for the feasibility of the overall concept. At the same time, we would encourage considering the full life cycle of e-vehicles, as well as including scrappage of old vehicles among the considerations that are important for the mitigation results. At the same time, when thinking about the financial mechanism for e-mobility programs, you might want to think first whether a subsidy is in fact needed to bridge the financing gap that's there, or whether such factors as, let's say, a reduction on import tariff would be sufficient to bridge the gap. So perhaps the subsidy might not necessarily be the best cure in all situations. Another point we have here goes in the direction also of the costs of the e-vehicles. So we would also like to see assumptions, or we welcome seeing the assumptions regarding the price parity, meaning seeing how the cost of e-vehicles becomes more accessible and competitive given the local context. Last but not least, under e-mobility, we have communication and awareness raising efforts here, which are of course important for ensuring timely acceptance. And one way to go about it would be to see which target groups are the most suitable for that. So for example, here we have taxis and public vehicles, which could be an idea for a starting point for communication and awareness raising campaigns. So that was all for transport. Next up, we have the waste sector. And here, our lessons learned and recommendations and things to consider would include such things as, first of all, starting with thinking about the waste management hierarchy as a key guiding principle. And here our general encouragement would be to focus on holistic solutions, including upstream activities rather than pure end of pipe measures. And this statement is there because we feel that the second option of these pure end of pipe measures could have limited transformational potential. And of course, transformational potential is one of the key aspects that we look for in our NSPs. Then next, we would have the sustainability of the financing model, which is also very relevant. And we feel that if the NSP ensures sufficient cost coverage of the waste management systems, the chances of the financing model being sustainable are actually higher. So we would encourage you to also take that into consideration. And at the same time, when it comes to waste streams themselves, it's very important to know what's waste and how much of it is produced. So that is also an important factor here for the waste sector. If we go next, we have more lessons. And this, the next one would include the social aspects and inclusion of the informal sector workers that should be considered in the NSPs dealing with the waste sector. As well as, again, the timescales and the planning that might need to be done for the project to take off. So here, such factors as site selection, obtaining permits and licenses, doing the supporting environmental and social impact assessment, as well as ensuring that public procurement processes are aligned, are crucial, and again might take a while. So it's important to make sure, and it's good for us to see when those timescales are also accounted for. At the same time, the risks of displacement and proper measures of dump sites remediation are important factors for the waste sector too. And lastly, we would have a point or allowing for sufficient time for triggering behavioral change. So even such situation and factors as, let's say, encouraging waste segregation at household level might take time and might need awareness raising efforts. So again, that time should be accounted for and included in the planning. With that, we can go to the next sector, which is energy efficiency. And on the energy efficiency topic, we have two parts here. First of which is some lessons on appliances and other hardware. And here, again, we're looking for transformational change in the sector. So we would feel that simple one-time replacement schemes are not sufficient to ensure that, and we'd rather look for more holistic interventions, ideally embedded in the sector strategy. And at the same time, the rebound effects should also not be forgotten. And when it comes to scrappage schemes here, we would encourage also to think about that and see that these scrappage schemes do remove old devices from the market, and this way lock in the mitigation effect. And at the same time, with the scrappage schemes, it's good if they are described in a lot of detail. So it's not just simply mentioning them, but actually describing how would they look like, what are the local capacities needed to make sure that they take place, and if there's bottlenecks on the capacity side, it could also be mentioned how those capacities could be improved. Yes, so next point for appliances bid for energy efficiency sector, we would also like to see that if there's any market distortions that could be identified, ideally there would not be any, so the intervention would not, let's say, favor one or two big suppliers or producers, but rather follow a competitive market approach in a local context. So it's good to see those considerations too in the NSP concepts. However, if the appliance is already on the market, it's good to target incremental costs rather than the complete investment costs here when putting together your concept. Last lesson on the appliances sector would be a potential to consider adjacent sectors to the current NSPs. So here, hypothetical situation could include a scenario where we have an NSP, let's say, working in the air conditioning sector, and then the new idea or the new concept could come, let's say, same local context, but working on the refrigeration sector or something like that. So will be air conditioning and refrigeration, kind of two adjacent sectors when it comes to appliances and energy efficiency. Great, thanks for switching slides. Next, we have the other part of lessons learned, which concerned buildings under energy efficiency. And here, again, we're looking for a holistic approach. In this case, it would be the whole building approach, as it's called, instead of simply replacing a couple of boilers here and there. Or the low-hanging fruits, in other words. And in any way, please consider and describe the quality, safety, and performance of the equipment used. So this could include such aspects as, let's say, the flammability of the housing insulation, building resilience in regards to earthquakes, any testing that goes with that, and how the NSP then works with these concepts. For new housing, it would be great, or it is great if the NSPs integrate the issues of urban planning to support the new housing developments. So these can include concepts for social infrastructure and public transport to accompany the new housing areas. However, when it comes to new housing, it's also important to not neglect the potential rebound effects, which in this case could include such factors as building new roads, adding more vehicles to the area, which then all impacts the mitigation potential. Another point here under buildings and housing would be considering owner and user dilemmas. Here, it's a situation where, let's say, the owner of the building is not the same as the tenant. So perhaps the tenant is incurring the costs while the owner is enjoying the benefits. Those situations would, of course, need to be addressed to make sure that those cost-benefit sharing ratios are actually aligned. So that would also be a good point to take into account. And lastly, we would also encourage approaches that consider different climate zones when designing housing interventions. So this essentially relates to a context where, let's say, perhaps there are different climate zones in one country, and then correspondingly, those housing interventions might need to be tweaked a little bit and to account for the different climate zones. And in that way, the mitigation potential can actually be even increased than keeping the same level of intervention. So I think, yes, that's all for the energy efficiency. And now we're moving on to renewable energy. Here again, similar narrative. The NSPs should trigger a sectoral change instead of simply financing a single or a few projects. And this technological solution that is proposed should be analyzed in a comprehensive manner and discussed with regards to alternatives in terms of CapEx, OpEx, who's owning it, who's operating it, what are the other resources available for renewable energy generation. So all of that dossier of the proposed technological solution in regards to the alternatives that are available should be there. When designing an NSP in the renewable energy sector, we'd encourage a focus on the more holistic renewable energy development rather than simple electricity access provision, as that helps to achieve, again, transformational change and has overall higher potential for ambition. And the last point on this slide would be an encouragement to analyze the effect of the fossil fuel subsidies or other relevant regulations and tariffs. Again, a similar situation, perhaps upon taking a closer look, there might be a situation where a reduction in tariff might already bridge the financing gap without a need for an extra subsidy. So all those discussions are really welcome and much appreciated when they're presented in the NSP concepts. And then we have a few points on the mini grids, as those are also quite an important bit under the renewable energy. So of course, when it comes to the mini grids, the geographical spread here can be quite large. So that could be a key cost factor. At the same time, the NSPs working with these concepts should also think about whether the target group is actually able and willing to pay for the service, as well as whether there are actually structures and agents who can collect those payments in an effective manner. Ideally, perhaps there would even be a situation where there's already anchor clients that could be identified at the initial stage. So all that adds extra weight and extra proof to the underlying concepts. However, it's also important to keep in mind that per se, working in such contexts might actually imply lower mitigation potential. However, here, as it has been mentioned throughout different NAMA facility communication channels, we always take into account the local context that's relevant to an NSP submission. So that would be all from me on the 4 sectors. And for the 5th one, I'll hand it over to Hélène to walk us through some lessons from the AFOLU side.
Thank you, Ernesta. So yes, I will finally go through some key lessons learned and recommendations for the agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector. So firstly, we would like to recommend that the design of AFOLU interventions be user-centric and based on a participatory approach. What we mean by this is that NSPs should strive to include farmers, for example, in the design process of financial mechanisms or any other policy instrument that is derived from the project, to really address their needs, vested interests, and in that way facilitate the scalability as well as sustainability of the intervention. As you may also know, AFOLU interventions tend to heavily rely on the long-term adoption of climate-friendly activities by the target group. So as such, it's important that behavioral change is appropriately understood, emphasized, and taken into account in the NAMA support project design. It is also key to clearly define the target group and identify potential subgroups, which may have, again, different needs, interests, for example, if we're talking about the formal or informal sectors, and of course, adjust the barrier analysis accordingly. It can also be quite helpful to work with relevant associations or institutions in the sector that may know the target groups involved. And finally, when thinking about the timeline, there are, of course, several factors that can affect it. from aligning with production cycles to securing the buying of stakeholders, or taking into account the time to adapt to the technology. And so in this respect, we advise you to be quite realistic about the timelines and the amount of work that would be needed. And so, yes, I've seen that we've moved on to some further recommendations from the sector. So it is helpful for NSPs in the AFOLU sector to have a clear picture of the landscape of relevant financial actors that can have already come in contact with the target market and may offer very suitable financial mechanisms that, for example, consider production cycles, the risks and cash flow related challenges, as well as sometimes the lack of traditional collateral for the target segment. And due to the financial barriers that are often exhibited in the AFOLU sector, it is also recommended to consider setups which can facilitate financial leverage via innovative forms of private sector engagement, for example, through the use of remittances, savings book approaches, or microfinancing, among others. And to facilitate the update of the financial mechanism, you should also try to build on existing structures, which may be closer to farmer organizations, ideally with established business relations. So this could be farmer associations, processing companies, service providers, and so on. Another point is that of labeling and certification. When proposing such a scheme, we've seen that you should try to make sure to provide a good rationale for it, to consider timing, have realistic assumptions, and if possible, always try to build on existing structures. And finally, and as also previously mentioned, it's important to try and be as realistic as possible with the timelines when designing your project concept. Of course, if you would like to get a better understanding of some of the key recommendations and lessons learned for the AFOLU sector, you can check the second webinar that we did under the Ambition Initiative Round 2, which goes a bit more into detail with regards to the AFOLU sector. And so with this, I will give back the word to my colleagues, Nina and Ernesta, to see if we can answer some of the questions that were raised in the chat.
Thanks, Hélène. Well, actually, we have one question in the chat, so I think we'll try and answer it. A question by Pascal is asking whether NAMA grants could be used as a guarantee towards financiers and investors. So Nina, could you give us an answer to that?
First of all, thank you very much, Pascal, for asking and for posting this question. So general answer would be yes, it is allowed. And the main idea behind the financial mechanism at the NAMA facility is that the financial mechanism is designed based on the market barriers that have been identified as part of the development of the NSP outline and then further refined upon the success of the NSP outline as part of the detailed preparation phase. So if it is considered that a guarantee mechanism can help overcome the market barriers identified in the preparation of the NSP outline, then yes, of course, it can be part of the financial cooperation component of the NSP outline. And in general, if you have such concerns or questions, I would recommend you to look into the NAMA facility website to check the existing portfolio of the NAMA facility and to see what kind of examples, what kind of projects are currently in implementation or in DPP, and what kind of different setups for financial mechanisms they feature and they offer. Of course, it's always very context dependent, but I guess it may provide some useful, helpful hands-on experience or hands-on knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Okay, sorry, I just appeared that your screen was frozen, so I wasn't sure if we were still good. Yes, I see another question in the chat on something I've said in terms of the different climate zones. And the European context. Well, I think we did not meant to say that any particular context is excluded from the situation. It would rather depend exactly on the context of the country. So I think this, as a rule of thumb, would concern bigger countries, perhaps, that have different climate zones. But of course, you know your country is best. And if that's the case in Georgia, having two different climate zones, then that's the situation that's there, I think. The climate zones are beyond our scope of influence, I would say, at the NAMA facility. Great. So I think with that, we would perhaps close our webinar. I'm looking at Nina, I guess, for further remarks. Or
Yes, yeah, I think so. We will anyway answer the questions that are posted in the chat, and we'll provide responses as part of the clarification request. I guess, just only quickly comment on the question on gender inclusiveness and gender mainstreaming activities, because I guess this is extremely important and something that we see as more and more relevant in the NAMA facility portfolio as well. But at the same time, it's very sector dependent. So probably it is a good note to us to compile such guidance based also on different sectors in which NSPs are intervening, because the approaches to gender mainstreaming can be different, but of course need to be considered independently from whether it is an NSP outline in the e-mobility sector, where you need to ensure safety of women, probably also increase participation of women in manufacturing, assembly activities, or even include women as potential taxi, bus, motorcycle drivers. And of course, in the waste management, where women are at the core of segregation facilities in many countries at the household level. So they should be educated. They can be a main disseminator of the information in the family and in the household, or women are also often a very core part of the informal sector in the waste sector activities. So, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much for this question, and I think we will pick it up even further and in a broader scope than just in clarification notes. For everything else, I think we indeed would close this webinar. So thank you very much for your interest. Thank you very much for active participation and for your questions. And since this is the last webinar of the NAMA facility, at least the last webinar for the Ambition Initiative Round 2, we really look forward to receiving your NSP outlines and are excited about the upcoming process of NSP outline assessment, selection, and hope to see some inspiring and encouraging examples of the NAMA support project, future NAMA support project. So thank you very much. Thanks a lot also to Ernesta, to Ellen, and to our colleague Halina supporting us in the background. Good luck with the NSP outline development. Thank you very much.
thank you and good luck.